What if I told you that stupidity isn't just the absence of intelligence, but something much more dangerous? A force that can turn brilliant people into instruments of destruction? What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't evil people doing evil things, but ordinary people who have simply stopped thinking? Picture this. A respected scientist with multiple degrees suddenly starts believing and spreading dangerous misinformation. A compassionate teacher begins endorsing harmful ideas. A loving parent starts making decisions that endanger their own children. These aren't evil people. They're smart, well-meaning individuals who've fallen victim to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the power of stupidity. And here's the truly terrifying part. This isn't happening to other people. It's happening to people just like you and me. This isn't just a theory. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted his famous obedience experiments at Yale University. Ordinary volunteers were instructed by an authority figure to give what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Even after hearing screams of agony, 65% of the participants delivered shocks they thought could be deadly. These weren't sadists or mentally ill. They were normal people who had temporarily given up their ability to make their own moral judgments. This is exactly what Bonhoeffer saw firsthand in Nazi Germany, and it led him to develop one of the most unsettling ideas about human nature ever imagined. But before we go deeper, I have to ask, have you ever found yourself believing something just because everyone around you believed it? Keep that question in mind as we explore what might be one of the most important psychological insights of our time. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't your typical philosopher in an ivory tower. He was a German Lutheran pastor who watched his entire country transform before his eyes. Born in 1906 to a family of intellectuals, Bonhoeffer had every reason to believe in the power of education and reason. But as the Nazi Party rose to power, he witnessed something that shattered his faith in human rationality. He watched as his fellow Germans, educated, cultured, religious people, began to support policies and leaders that went against everything they claimed to believe. This wasn't a case of ignorant people being manipulated. These were professors, doctors, and church leaders who were actively taking part in their own intellectual surrender. From his prison cell in 1943, waiting to be executed for his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote down his most haunting thought: "Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Protests don't work, and force is useless. Reason falls on deaf ears." What made this so chilling wasn't just the situation, but how accurate it was. Evil, he pointed out, always contains the seeds of its own destruction. It makes people uncomfortable and creates resistance. But stupidity actually believes it's doing good, which makes it completely immune to correction. Perhaps Bonhoeffer's most brilliant insight was about how stupidity helps people in power. Evil people know they're doing wrong, which creates doubt and conflict. But people caught in functional stupidity truly believe they are doing the right thing, which makes them impossible to correct. This isn't an accident. Powerful people don't need to suppress information anymore. They just need to create a world where thinking honestly is too exhausting or socially damaging. When Bonhoeffer used the word stupidity, he wasn't talking about low IQ. He was describing something much deeper, a kind of willful ignorance. In his letters from prison, he explained it this way: "The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not fool us into thinking he is independent. In a conversation with him, you feel like you aren't dealing with a person at all, but with slogans and catchphrases that have taken him over." Here's what made his idea so revolutionary. He argued that this stupidity isn't an individual failing. It's the result of outside pressures that make thinking for yourself both difficult and costly. The truth is, our modern world often rewards mental shortcuts. Social media companies make billions when we react with emotion instead of thinking things through. News channels get more clicks from outrage than from thoughtful analysis. Politicians win elections with simple slogans, not complex solutions. When you're working multiple jobs, drowning in debt, and constantly bombarded with information, giving up on deep thinking becomes a survival strategy. Economists even have a term for it: rational ignorance. It becomes easier to stay uninformed than to invest the time and energy it takes to truly understand complex issues. But what's easy for one person becomes a disaster for everyone. This is the exact dynamic Bonhoeffer saw in Germany. And while our world pushes us toward these shortcuts, Our brains are wired to go along with it. In the 1950s, research on cognitive dissonance showed that our brains literally fight to reject information that contradicts what we already believe. This gets even worse when we're stressed or feel insecure, which is exactly the state many of us live in today. Bonhoeffer also noticed that stupidity spreads in groups. He realized it wasn't a psychological problem, but a social one. He saw that smart, rational people would abandon their critical thinking skills just to be part of a crowd. Decades later, experiments by Solomon Asch proved him right. When surrounded by a group giving obviously wrong answers, 75% of people will go along with the crowd at least once, even when they know it's wrong. Now think about how that plays out in our digital age. Social media algorithms create echo chambers that make this problem worse than ever. A 2018 MIT study found that lies spread 6 times faster than truth on social platforms. Why? Because lies are often more emotionally exciting than the complicated truth. When you share misinformation that confirms what you already think, you become part of a system that rewards easy answers over careful thought. The algorithm just feeds you more of the same, trapping you in intellectual quicksand. Have you ever noticed your social media feed seems to show you exactly what you want to see? That's not an accident. It's how chosen ignorance works. We've seen this happen throughout history. The Salem witch trials weren't run by evil people, but by religious community members who truly believed they were protecting their neighbors. The Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't driven by evil masterminds, but by patriotic Americans who honestly thought they were defending democracy. In every case, smart, educated people gave up critical thinking for the comfort of group agreement. If our brains and our world are rigged against us, how do we fight back? Bonhoeffer believed the answer was what he called costly grace, the willingness to think for yourself even when it's painful, unpopular, or dangerous. Today, we know we're not just fighting social pressure, we're fighting our own evolutionary wiring and billion-dollar algorithms designed to exploit our mental shortcuts. On a personal level, we can practice what psychologists call intellectual humility, accepting that our knowledge is never complete and that we could be wrong. This means looking for information that contradicts our beliefs, not to feel bad, but to see if our beliefs are actually worth holding on to. Here are a few practical things you can do every day. First, seek out friction. Once a week, spend some time reading a thoughtful argument from someone you disagree with. The goal isn't to change your mind, but to test if your own ideas can hold up under pressure. Second, ask yourself, what would change my mind? If you're absolutely certain about something, ask what evidence could prove you wrong. If you can't think of anything, that's a red flag. Third, slow down your sharing. Before you post something online, take 60 seconds to check it with a reliable source. That short pause can break the cycle of emotional reaction that these platforms feed on. Fourth, practice saying, I don't know. In a world that rewards loud opinions, admitting you don't have all the answers is a powerful act of honesty. But personal habits are not enough. We also need to push for bigger changes that make thinking honestly easier for everyone. This includes demanding transparency from social media companies, funding education about media literacy, and creating economic policies that reduce the stress that makes people so vulnerable to simple, dangerous ideas. When people aren't constantly worried about their health, housing, and jobs, they have the mental energy to think about complex issues. Bonhoeffer's idea was brilliant for his time, but he couldn't have known how much worse it would get. This isn't just about social pressure anymore. Modern science shows our brains are literally wired to fall for this. Bonhoeffer saw propaganda in newspapers and on the radio. We're living with something far more powerful. We've gone from propaganda to social media algorithms that know our exact psychological weaknesses. And now, we're entering the age of AI deepfakes that can create fake reality. The threat is targeting the very way our minds work. This is about your brain's wiring. Our minds evolved to be fast, not always accurate, to trust what's familiar, and to look for information that confirms what we already believe. These were survival skills. But now, there are bugs in our system that can be exploited. The scariest part is that we're all vulnerable, no matter how smart we think we are. When people feel threatened and uncertain, they become easily attracted to simple stories from confident-sounding voices. And today, we're not just dealing with human manipulation. We're facing AI systems designed to exploit our weaknesses with surgical precision. Every click and every emotional reaction is used to weaken our ability to think for ourselves. We saw this happen during COVID-19. Smart people, doctors, engineers, and lawyers started sharing debunked theories about vaccines. This wasn't a failure of their intelligence. It was a failure of their intellectual independence under extreme pressure. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for refusing to give up his mind. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered. His last words were reportedly, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." His sacrifice wasn't just political, it was a defense of human thought itself. He understood that when we stop thinking for ourselves, we stop being fully human. We become, as he said, puppets on a string. And this is where his final challenge speaks to us today. Who stands fast? When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when thinking for yourself takes courage, when the truth costs more than comfortable lies, who stands fast? The answer isn't a higher IQ or a better education. It's in the daily choice to stay curious instead of certain, to seek truth instead of comfort, and to think carefully instead of reacting quickly. These aren't heroic acts. They are simple habits that become extraordinary when everyone around you has stopped doing them. The tragedy is that giving up on thinking can feel like freedom. Thinking is hard work. It's uncomfortable to hold conflicting ideas in your head. It's painful to admit you might be wrong. But Bonhoeffer argued this discomfort is the price of being human. In a world that profits from our mental surrender, choosing to think for ourselves is a radical act. This brings us to the most uncomfortable truth of all. We are all at risk of functional stupidity. The moment we think we're immune, we've already started to fall. The price of mental freedom is constant vigilance, not against enemies on the outside, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when it gets hard. Bonhoeffer's idea is so unsettling because it's so true. We see it everywhere. Smart people believing things that are obviously false, educated people making terrible decisions, and good people supporting policies that go against their own values. The problem isn't that people are getting dumber. It's that our systems reward mental shortcuts instead of careful thought. But there's real hope in this dark diagnosis. If stupidity is a choice, it can also be rejected. If the system is the problem, systems can be changed. We can create a world that makes thinking easier, not harder. Think of critical thinking like exercise. It's uncomfortable at first, but it's essential for strength. Just as you wouldn't run a marathon without training, you can't navigate our complex world without practicing mental discipline. The muscles for independent thought have to be used, or they will weaken. The next time you feel absolutely certain about something, the next time you catch yourself dismissing evidence without thinking, the next time you enjoy the comfort of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity doesn't arrive with a big announcement. It whispers that you already know everything you need to know, and in that moment, you have a choice. Will you give up your mind for the comfort of being certain, or will you choose the harder path of intellectual freedom? The question Bonhoeffer leaves us with isn't whether we're smart enough to avoid stupidity. It's whether we're committed enough to keep thinking when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly. In a world that profits from our mental surrender, choosing to think for ourselves is one of the most important things we can do. So here's my challenge to you this week. Pick one belief you hold strongly and spend 30 minutes researching the best arguments against it. Don't do it to torture yourself or to become paralyzed by doubt. Do it to practice the kind of intellectual courage Bonhoeffer died for. If your belief holds up against an honest challenge, you'll believe it with more confidence. If it doesn't, you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between being certain and knowing the truth. The future of human dignity might just depend on how we answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. If this has made you question something you thought you knew, that's not a weakness. It's the beginning of intellectual courage. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in a world designed to profit from our mental surrender, the simple act of thinking carefully is the most powerful form of resistance we have. And here's what I want you to remember. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, and careful thinking over quick reactions, you're not just protecting your own mind. You're defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Let me know in the comments. And let's promise to be the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has stopped thinking.